Marimo. I have worked professionally on a number of video games and worked on the localization pipeline for them. You may recognize some of them. I worked on Monster Train Inkbound and the recent Monster Train 2. I've contributed to localization efforts for all of them, and it's localization not just from one language to another, but one language to many other languages. So while this is not showing emojis, that's fine. The languages I have worked on, English, specifically US English, German, Chinese, French, Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, Russian, Japanese as well. We are going to cover all that and more today. So the agenda of my rant, I'm going to talk about why are we doing this. We're going to look at anime versus video games. We're going to look at video games more in specific, but we're going to do some comparing and contrasting. And we're going to go through all of these languages that I mentioned and see what sort of problems may come up. And afterwards, we'll have a little Q&A session. So why do we even bother? Well, number one is pride. Right? We want people to engage with our works. If you make things in only one language, only people who know that language can interact with it. We love having fans, we have a big ego, we want as many people around the world to play our games, to watch our media, to enjoy our content. Okay, the real reason is money. You need money to live. It's just a matter of the fact, and if you have more languages that you could support, you could sell in more regions, you could get more customers who otherwise would ignore your work. So here is a Steam global traffic map, and you might see there are two countries that stand out in particular, the United States and China. So if you could only pick one language, you're going to pick English. If you could pick two, you're going to get Chinese. Anything after that is just for fun. So let's compare and contrast what it means to localize anime versus what it means to localize video games, which really means localizing static text versus dynamic text. So what is static text? Static text is, there is a one-to-one translation. That doesn't mean there's only one right way to translate something. It just means that you have one line of text in one language, you're getting another line in another language. So the context of that isn't changing, hence it is static. There's no parameterization as a result, and we'll talk about what that means very soon. So for example, you have Asuka here, and there's a line that is said in Japanese, and you pick what the English translation is, and there it is. So in books, in films, in television, this is like the typical way to translate things. Okay, makes sense. Dynamic text is a little bit different because the text can change. So it has these parameters, these variables. So for example, in Monster Train, you can upgrade your cards. So you could apply spikes 4, but then I've added double stack. So now it says spikes 8. So the number 4 became 8 suddenly. So when we translate and write the text, even in English, you're writing it so that it could take on these different contexts and change what it appears as. So sometimes one displayed string actually has many different inputs, and when you translate a video game in particular, you have to take that into consideration. You also see it in web and mobile apps, particularly when numbers come into play. So let's take a look at some static text as comparison. So, iyo tenki desu ne. You could translate this, oh, nice weather, isn't it? Right? This is static. It has one line in Japanese, the context is not changing, and you just choose how you want to translate and localize that for your language. With dynamic text, let's say we're making a game, and in the game you can name your character. So you say, Oha, 01. Okay, so 0 could be the name of the player, and then the one variable is like, oh, maybe it's kun if you said your player's male, and maybe it's chan if it's female. And then you have to decide how to localize that into your language. And as you can see here, the English localization that we landed on ignored one of these parameters because it doesn't necessarily make sense to have kun-chan as an ending in English. It can, but they decided not to, so it'd say morning, 0. And that's the type of translation mentality you have to have for video games. That's the main difference between just, I have some lines from a book and I need to translate it. This means human error can happen, so welcome to the Spanish translation of Final Fantasy, where they were supposed to have the name of a character here. They named themselves Rosa, but the parameter was not written correctly. So if we go back, imagine somebody writing this forgot those curly braces. Then you're just going to get something like this. Now, in a modern game, you can patch and fix things and make it work. This was printed on a cartridge, so you can do different cartridge versions, and there are many games that have different cartridge versions to fix some things like this, but yeah, sometimes it makes it to the final cut. So overall, it's kind of a disaster because not all languages follow the same grammar rules. We saw for the Japanese example, there's these endings, these kuns, the chans, the sans, they're not in English. You could add them, but it's kind of weird. So some parameters may be used, some might not be. When you prepare text to translate, regardless of if you write it in English or write it in Japanese or German or any language, you have to have some level of knowledge of the languages you're localizing in. Here's the thing, most game programmers, especially in the US, they only speak English. So we're gonna teach everybody here, you're gonna learn, and then maybe if you work on a game translation, you can influence the decisions in that pipeline. So as a little tangent, do you want to use a literal or a machine translation? Because if you do, sometimes your cute little dress-up game goes into a direction that's a little unusual. All right, so let's talk about localizing English into English. I'm so sorry the emojis don't work on this machine. My laptop did not actually plug in. So yes, you could localize English into English, and if you were paying attention, you're seeing this S and Z, also known as Z, showing up. So what's up with that? Okay, so you probably are aware that depending on where you are in the world, your English language has different spellings based on the region, and the rules are not consistent. Okay, pop quiz time. Which one is American, Canadian, and British? So we have two of each. Decide which are American English, Canadian English, and British English. I'll give you a moment. Okay, have you figured it out? Let's find out. So, color without a U is American, color with a U, Canadian, British. Cool. Analyze or analyze, you might notice that CA symbol there. Something's going on with Canada here. Localize, localize, okay, so Canada usually uses the S and not the Z. Traveling or traveling, hang on, Canada's doing some weird things. So is Canada okay? And I asked my Canadian friend, and this is what he had to say. This friend of mine is also a lawyer, so he's like, yeah, it's a nightmare. It's like, hey, does that actually come up if the contract says traveling in a different way? Does that mean something different? He was like, I don't want to talk about it. Okay, so what is the conclusion for English? What do you do about this? If you're writing in English, the thing is, let's go back a bit, you can understand all of these, right? It's not like you can't tell what the word is. So if you're writing in English, you usually will just pick your locale and you'll stick with it. It's okay for a British person to see American English. They might be upset about it, but they'll live. If you are translating into English and you have to make a choice, you're probably picking America just because of the market size. You will only consider English to English localization in like pretty extreme cases. You have a giant budget, you're doing a children's book, and maybe it's more important that children in like Britain are reading British English. You know, there are some fantasy novels out there where they do actually do an English to English localization and translation, which is very funny, but I think nowadays not so common. Okay, let's talk about French. French? Oh, yeah.
Oui, oui.
So let's talk about the accents, because I've had a fight with my coworkers about this before. Accents aren't optional in French. So sure, not a problem. The translator could give you the accent. Does the font you're using support the accent? Are you using your own cool little 8-bit font where you made your own characters and you didn't put accented characters? You're gonna need to add accented characters. You're gonna need these accents specifically for French, and it's gonna differ depending on your languages. It is not optional. There are also distinct quotation marks in French. So the way French works is you have these unique quotation marks, and you're putting a space before the quotation mark and after the quotation mark. You may also notice there's a space before the exclamation point. That space is a little unique. This is called the non-breaking space. So some grammatical constructs and marks in French, they have a space before a character. That space is not the same space as the one after. It's non-breaking. So what does breaking mean is if I'm writing a big old line of text, it will try to break to go to the next line sometimes. And it usually uses like spaces to determine like, okay, it is safe to do that rather than in the middle of a word. But French has non-breaking space, and non-breaking space, you cannot do that. And if you do have that, it looks a little weird. So it is also not optional in most cases. Also, your font might not have the non-breaking space character, which means you will get the document before you import it into your game, and you'll see, oh yeah, looks fine, and then you input it into your game, and the non-breaking space is going to show up as a weird square. And you're just going to be like, I don't understand. So then you look at the text, and you look at the text, like, it looks like a space. Why is the space not showing up? And then you go back and forth, and it's a nightmare if you don't know the fact that non-breaking spaces exist. So they are actually different Unicode codes. If you look at it, it is not optional. It is very important. That means grammatical compound keys need to be localized as well. So this is an example of static text localization, right? What happens if I have dynamic text with this? We're going to see that in a little bit. It gets a little funky. French is funky. Let's have a little tangent about puns, and jokes. So generally, jokes are some of the hardest things to localize because they're so context and language specific. So when you are making a joke and you want the translator to really make sure they translate the joke correctly, you should have metadata for every single line in your game, and if necessary, provide context as to what the joke is. I know explaining the joke ruins the joke. The translator needs to know the context to be most effective. So for example, in Monster Train, they said, make a bunch of achievements, and they gave me the task, and I was like, I'm gonna make all the achievements puns. Nobody can stop me. The final boss of the game was called Seraph, so I made an achievement when you beat Seraph as Sans Serif, or Sans Seraph, not Undertale related. So in French, the name of Seraph is Séraphine. So they decided to localize the joke that I wrote as Séraphine, fin meaning done, right? And it's because I provided context for all of these jokes, and so when I looked through the French translation, I was like, ooh, this is good. This is really good. People are gonna like this. So also be ready to provide context for your localizations. That's something official translations get for like Japanese to English for games. That is not something fan translators get. So sometimes they have to just guess and pray. Okay, let's talk about Spanish and Portuguese. I'm so sad the emojis aren't working on this laptop, but it's fine. So let's talk about colonization, as said, real quick to get a sense of why this is a difficult problem. So we're going to give a big shout out to Bill Wurst for this graphic. A long time ago, the Pope said, we're dividing the world in half, and half is Spain and half is Portugal. And that's just how it was. It is more language diversity than in English, however. So we saw English to English localization, that's fine. Spanish words are very different depending on where in the world you are. So the word for cell phone could be different. The word for computer could be different. So in Mexico, like computadora, celular, but in Spain it's more ordinador, móvil. I don't know if my accent's good, I'm trying. I've never studied Spanish. So they're not actually the same language. They're not really interchangeable. So what I've noticed is the closer you are to Spain and Portugal versus Mexico and Brazil kind of augments your decision-making business-wise. American devs are probably gonna pick Mexican Spanish if they pick Spanish at all, just because it's right there, and you can easily find people who speak Mexican Spanish. Like, very easy to find somebody in the US. Whereas if you're in like France and you want to translate to Spanish, well, Spain is right there, so that makes sense. However, I did notice overall that Brazil wins in Portuguese, even if you're near Portugal, just the Brazilian market's so much bigger, so sorry, Portugal. Nintendo has a case, notoriously choosing Spain Spanish over all other Spanishes and not providing other options. This is a really, really big problem for Pokemon. And you may not understand why that's a big problem for Pokemon, but that's because some things that are normal to say in Spain Spanish are kind of insults or slurs or just different in Mexican Spanish. So if you're playing in Spain, oh yeah, Pokemon, my favorite children's game. And if you're playing in Mexico, I had to censor this. You could ask me after the panel what the word was. It's good. It's good. So let's talk about German. It's the most anti-UI language. Anybody speak German here? Okay, cool. You probably know that words get really big. So, and they don't like spaces. So I do not speak German, so I'm going to try my best at this accent. Bundesrepublik, the Federal Republic, or Federal Constitution on Bundesverfassungsgesetz. You try to pronounce that yourself if you don't know German. Because you don't have spaces, imagine UI in games. You want to fit it in a nice HUD, you want to make things fit on the screen and look really good, and then you have to deal with this. Because we were talking about breaking spaces and non-breaking spaces. What about no spaces? So I had a big struggle of like, how do I do this localization in German without it like looking awful? And I went to GDC, Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, and I asked a bunch of other devs who had to deal with this problem. And I was like, the only solution I had was I had special code saying, if German, do this. And they're like, yeah, we do the same. And I was like, ah, cool, thanks, German. Thank you, Germany. So one solution we had for Monster Train was we started squashing text. So we actually use this in English as well, but you could really see it between these two examples for the automatic rail spikes, where you see the text is like not that squashed in English, but it's a lot more squashed in German, and that even had one space. So one of our UI solutions was like if we like curve the text and squash it, that kind of works because the UI design took German into consideration from the beginning. If your UI design did not take German into consideration, you might need to use some abbreviations, take some compromises, and this is true not just for German. The very first Final Fantasy, when they were translating all of the spells from Japanese to English, they were like, oh yeah, we can only fit 4 characters per spell. So we have fire. What do we call fire 2? Oh, fur 2. Okay, cool, we got fur 3 now. And like all of these spells is like just really condensed and like sometimes really hard to understand what they're trying to say. So you know, you could take that option as well if you need to, if you have nothing better to do. Part of it is that it was harder in those older games because they can't just go to the source material and say, hey, we need you to like update the code. Very few games were like willing to do that. In a more modern sense, yeah, we'll add custom code for Germans, it's fine. It's a really fun one. We're gonna talk about Han unification. We're gonna talk about fonts. We're gonna talk about a lot of things here. And I suspect there are probably some people here who speak Chinese. Anybody speak Chinese? Yes, great. I first gave this talk at a small convention in rural Pennsylvania, and when I asked if anybody spoke Chinese, nobody did. So, let me preface this. Failure is not an option. China is the second largest gaming market after the US. It is really important. Do you like money? Don't mess this up. If your translation fails because of you, oh, that's bad for you, buddy. This is your most important one. We're gonna preface this. Like, if you are going to put any extra effort and go the full mile for anything, you're doing it for Chinese. How many characters do we need to support? This is not even close to all of them. This is not even close. You have a radical table on the left there. This was an old website called Kojak. I don't know if it still exists, but I use this to learn a lot of this. Grammatical characters too. So we talked about how in French, for example, you have to have this non-breaking space before the colon. But in Chinese and Japanese, the colon's not rendering correctly here, which is a real shame, but it's actually one character. In English, like colon, space. In Japanese, or in French, non-breaking space, colon, breaking space. In Japanese, Chinese, full width colon, same width as any kanji, hanzi you see. And the reason for that is if everything's the same width, then everything's a nice, beautiful block-like shape. So imagine like a card, everything fits into this perfect square. It looks really good if you do it correctly. I had a huge fight with my coworkers over this one. This one was spicy, because they didn't believe me. And I was like, I don't understand how you don't believe me. And they're like, well, I looked up this card I saw in Hearthstone in Chinese, and I was like, it's literally doing the thing I'm talking about. And they were like, yeah, we're engineers. We don't want to put the effort in. We don't believe you. And eventually I had to go to the CEO, and I was like, hey, Mr. CEO person, you worked on video games in Japan, right? He's like, yep. I was like, cool, can you convince everybody else that I'm correct here? He was like, oh, that's the problem. Yeah, okay, we'll do that. Cool, so that's your grammatical dynamic strings. So for example, you have like something colon something in the game, and it could be like, I don't know, like potion, colon, the effect, like item name, colon, whatever the effect is, that colon is going to be localized as well. So your grammatical constructs, is what I was alluding to earlier, also have to be localized. So are we using traditional, simplified Japanese? So some people think there's just one font for all of these languages. They think, oh yeah, traditional and simplified in Japanese, it all exists in one font. It doesn't. You have to treat these as different languages if you're supporting them. Do not use a Chinese font for Japanese. Do not use a Japanese font for Chinese. It's not gonna work that way. There is no singular East Asian language font. You know, some of my coworkers, who are all American, who didn't speak other languages, they thought there was, there isn't. And it gets even worse. Let's talk about Han unification. In Unicode, all of these characters, which look different, use the same glyph. So on this particular computer, you can see the glyph is rendering as simplified Chinese. Because, where's my mouse? Right there. But depending on where you're localizing to, the display of this is going to be different. And it's only the font that determines the differences here. So that means if you're supporting simplified Chinese and traditional, you probably need different fonts for the two of them. This becomes really a problem if you have a lot of fonts and a lot of stylized fonts. Fonts become a really big issue. Also, just the sheer number of characters you need to ship in your game. So now, if you're shipping a game where I could boot it up on PC and I could switch it to any language I want, I'm including all these fonts. I'm including a simplified font, a traditional font, including Japanese font. You don't really get Korean Hanja much anymore, but if for some reason you're doing that, you're including that. I have never seen a video game do that. So you're getting massive, 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 massive files. Let's be mindful of font choices. Most Americans don't speak Chinese. So they'll just pick the first Chinese font they see, and it might be the equivalent of Comic Sans. It might look really bad. And your Chinese audiences will be upset with you. So one difference on Steam is that when Americans want to complain, they kind of take the Steam forums first. And when Chinese people want to complain on Steam, they will just give you a bad rating. Which will impact your sales. They'll just be like, I like the game, but the font's bad. Thumbs down. Don't recommend it. Then it's like 2,000 hours on record, and you're like, oh, come on, dude. You don't want that to happen to you. That's bad. So font atlases become the final boss. So some people say, okay, including all of Chinese is daunting, and you don't want to really do that, so you want to bake your font into these pre-baked images. We call them font atlases. And then you want to take that, and it's like, cool, these are pre-baked, they're pre-rendered, here's the font, and some people are like, we're really clever. We'll only include the characters that we're using. That's a decent solution if your game is purely static text. What if you are playing an online game where people could just chat in a little chat box? You're gonna need to include the entire font then. What happens if you make a patch for your game with static font atlasing, and your patch translation uses the character that wasn't in the font atlas? This happened with Tomb Raider, the new Tomb Raider game. I was talking to one of the production managers of that at GDC, and she said they did font atlases for Chinese, it worked, they needed to make a patch, and the patch added a little bit of new text in Chinese, and it used characters that were not in the font atlas. If they rebake the font atlas, this tiny performance patch that they really needed to ship suddenly became like 500 megabytes. So they went to the translator, they're like, can you translate it differently? Which is like saying like, hey, okay, imagine a very simple circumstance is like, you're translating a word as volcano, right? And then the translator comes back to you and is like, can you change the translation? We don't support V's. So what are you gonna do about that? Oh, fire mountain. Cool. Okay, so technically, the writing system is independent of language. Some people say, okay, well, we use simplified for like Mandarin and the traditional for Cantonese, and that's not 100% accurate. So if you're dubbing into these languages, you don't want to tie your dub into like your subtitles, right? So if you have like a Mandarin and Cantonese dub, you should not say, well, you only get the Cantonese dub if you're also playing in like traditional Chinese. You should have these as independent toggles, and you should support being able to toggle the voice and text, because guess what? Even in like Western audiences, people like to change the languages sometimes. So Genshin Impact, you know, you might want to play it English subtitles, Japanese dub, but like while I was playing it, it's like sometimes I was like, I want to change it up. Let me just switch to the Chinese dub real quick. I want to hear what that's like. Because the game gave me the option. I was like, oh yeah, I've heard all of Hu Tao's voice lines in Japanese. What does she sound like in Chinese? So it's actually really good to just have these toggles anyway, keep it all independent, because, you know, other people might want it, not just as accessibility, just as a curiosity, and that's really cool. So let's talk about when fonts go wrong. This is a famous example from when I worked on Inbound. People who speak Chinese probably know what this says. So remember that be mindful of font choices thing I mentioned? So I didn't get to pick the Chinese font for that game. Somebody else did, and the font looked like that.
Oh.
And so at first my boss was like, hey, we're getting a black square character, something's wrong. But then I really zoomed in and I was like, no, that's just the font. So the bottom one, you know, is kind of maybe acceptable. It's pretty stylized, it's kind of hard to read. That top one, that top one is not acceptable at all. I don't know why the font decided that was correct. It's not. So we ended up having to pick a different font. Okay, let's talk about Japanese now. Yeah, we need to talk about Japanese. Has anybody read this book, First Person Singular by Murakami? It's pretty good if you haven't. I would recommend it. Go to your library. Let's talk about pronouns real quick. So, in English, we have gender corresponding to our third person singular pronoun. That's where you get the he, she, him, her, all of that. This is not true for all languages. For example, in Turkish, there is absolutely no distinction made. It's also kind of not true for Japanese. So yes, in third person, there are these gendered pronouns, but you're probably going to talk about their name, or you're going to talk about their title. You're going to say, like, not he is, you're going to say, oh, sensei is, or this person's name is, right? Same with, like, so in second person, you know, there's genderless pronouns as well, anata, but, you know, that could also be like dear. You're probably also using the title or name, so you're not really making a distinction. But what gets cool is the first person. There are a lot of first person singular pronouns. In fact, there was an entire game show. This slide is from Clyde Mandelin. Clyde Mandelin did the Mother 3 fan translation. He's an old friend of mine. He works at Funimation, or used to. He did the Dragon Ball Z translation, so that's cool. He knows what he's doing. So he shared the slide with me, and I was like, oh no. There's a lot of options. And if you watch anime, and you're an anime fan, you've probably encountered this yourself.
Wow.
As a tangent, some of these have a gendered connotation, some don't. It is self-expression at its best because in English, gender is communicated versus third-person singular pronouns. You don't have control of if somebody goes up to you and talks about you and says he or she. It's whatever they decide ultimately. You can like try to guide that conversation, but if they don't know, they might get it wrong. In Japanese, because gender is primarily through that first-person pronoun, well, I'm the only one using the first-person pronoun. It's the first person, right? So you have more control over your identity. So let's take a look at some of these common first-person pronouns in Japanese. Only a few, because this could be an entire panel on its own. Watashi, standard affair. If you ever want to know the link between Ikari Kendo and Amber at Genshin Impact, this is it. He probably loves his daughter more than his son. Yeah, there was a part of me making the slide saying, am I doing this? Yes, I am. Watashi is kind of like super standard. It's super safe. It's like very basic. Amber's basic. You know, you gotta get her out of your party. She's the first one you get. But it also could be like basic in a confident way. Like Gendo has an energy to him where he's like, I don't need to pick a more specific pronoun. Watashi. It's like, oh, that's like kind of intimidating. It's imposing. That's cool. Boku is very boyish, right? So, you know, Venti is a twink. He says boku. Shinji can be defined as a twink by some circles. He uses boku. Boyish. So ore, that's like cool, you're a cool dude, or you're a tomboy. So ore usually has this masculine connotation, but you see female characters who use it as well. That also has an implication. Sonic uses ore, so he's very, very cool. Let's talk about the problem with translating to and from English. So in Japanese, and again, Clyde Mandelin, the legend, thank you for this graphic. In Japanese, you have all of these different ways and more. And in English, oh, I am, me. So imagine translating the inverse of that, going from English to Japanese. So the problem is, if you do not specify your text clearly enough, then the different lines that the translators are getting, they might not know who's saying which line. And if they don't know, is this a male character, is this a female character, are they older, are they younger, who is this character, who's saying this line, they're just gonna use watashi, because that is always going to be correct. But then if you're a Japanese person playing the game, oh, everybody's saying watashi, this is really boring. It's so basic. Sometimes, some games do like this little mix and match thing, where like, they take some lines and they just slap them together, concatenate them together. The Japanese translation of Skyrim is really famous for this, of getting like this buff, gruff, like, oh, ore wa, and then at the end of the, like, line, the same character goes, "Oh, atashi mo suki desu." And it's like, whoa! The most popular patch of Skyrim in Japanese is fixing the pronouns because it is a mess. But I mean, it's a Bethesda game, so what do you expect? Anyway, if you know the language well enough, or if you're aware of this, you should say, hey, in the metadata, which we already have metadata, we're explaining the jokes and puns, we're explaining context. You're gonna say, this line is said by this character, and then you have a master sheet saying, like, here's info about the character. You have this character, here's their gender, here's their age, here's their yada yada yada, or their villain, whatever, that they can reference. That way, when the translator sees the line, they could see the metadata, and they could say, oh yeah, I'm going to make a decision. So when I helped do the localization pipeline for Inkbound, we had a bunch of characters, and there were like 20 characters, and I gave suggestions to the Japanese translation on like, I think these ones might work. You're free to change it, but these are the ones that I think would work, and this is why. They were like, oh yeah, we really appreciate the fact that you like sat down and put in the effort. They did change some of my choices to make it what they felt was best based on like the actual context of the lines, but they were like, it was a really good starting point, right? One thing to consider, pronoun usage is fluid. And I think this was Final Fantasy V, where there's I don't know the details of it very well. Clyde was telling me about it. There's a character who starts off like super aggressive, super cocky, and then they get their comeuppance by the like midpoint of the game. And when they get to the midpoint of the game, their pronoun usage in Japanese changes. And it's not because of gender or anything, it's just like confidence changes. So in the middle of the game, they were using watashi. They were like suddenly like, they've lost their identity a bit. And now they're using the basic pronoun. By the end of the game, they have a new identity, they have new strength, new courage, they're now using something different. So it's actually fluid, and that's just a really cool thing in Japanese that you just can't really do in English. So how do you try to put this concept into English? It doesn't exist. So you could communicate these ideas based off of other things, because translation and localization are different. Translation is one-to-one, kind of, but localization is you're making these decisions. So a very common thing is if you see like atashi or these more feminine pronouns, you might try to use more girly language choices. I put that in quotes because, you know, that's up to the translator. Like if someone's clearly a gyaru type character, you're gonna be like, oh my gosh, right? If someone's using like the weird like neko, neo pronoun type thing, you're gonna put like meows in there. So one of those is ore-sama. So never forget the ore-sama to your boy Guzma pipeline. So this is how Pokemon handled it in English. Because in Japanese he says ore-sama. But in English they were like, it's your boy Guzma. And that's actually a really good translation. That's really good. That is good localization. Too bad they don't do that for Spanish. But I mean, really good in English. So like, this is really cool. And that's like the correct way to approach how you translate this. Let's talk about Russian. Things get really rough. Anybody speak Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian, any of that? No? Okay, cool. We're gonna have a lot of fun. Anybody know what a pockle is? The pockle tense. Oh boy. So, let's talk about grammatical numbers. Numbers are the true final boss of localization. You got cardinal numbers. You got 1 day, 2 days. Ordinal numbers. The first day, the second day, the third day, the fourth day, and ranges, 1 to 2 days. We're only going to focus on cardinal numbers because this is rough. So there are technically, in English, you might say there's a singular and plural. 1 day, 2 days. What about 0? Well, 0 days. So 0 uses the plural, question mark. So there is a sort of guidance that there's like generally 6 integer cardinal categories when the quantity is 0. When it's 1, when it's 2, when it's greater than 2 but still kind of small, when it's like larger than the small, and then like everything else. So in English it's technically a 1 tense and an other tense. But different languages have different rules. So, you know, with English, as we see, pretty simple. You understand this. Japanese, technically, they don't have any. It's just everything is the same. Like, yes, there are counters and stuff, and the way you pronounce that's differently, but the word for car, like kuruma, that's not changing. Whether it's 1 or 100, it doesn't change, right? Same with Chinese. Isn't this the Russian section?
Uh-oh.
Here are the ones that Russian uses. The one, the few, and the many. So, how does that work? Well, you can see a little pattern down here, and the few tense is called the pockle tense. This shows up in some other languages as well. It shows up in Polish. So, If the quantity ends in a 1, use the 1 tense. If it ends in a 2, 3, or 4, use the few tense. Unless it's ending in 11, 12, 13, or 14, then you're using the many tense. Okay, so you're translating your game into Russian. Are you taking this into consideration?
Oh no.
So when I brought this up, they were like, we'll have a plural plus in our programming. I was like, no, you're not. That's not what this is called. And the thing is, English needs this too, technically. Draw 1 card, draw 2 cards. Anybody play a video game where we see parenthesis S, parenthesis? Even Pokemon does that. I was like, you guys have budget, right? Doesn't really, small indie company. But I was like, you guys could definitely have, not say like, oh yeah, would you like 3 potion, parenthesis S, parenthesis. You could translate it like, do you want 3 potions or do you want 1 potion? You can make it correct. A lot of video games decide to just forego the entire thing. They're like, do you want 2x potion? Which in English sounds really weird, but I guess we're used to it now. But you can do better. And I think in the case of what I was working on, which is a card game, you do actually want to consider the fact that you want it to read correctly. You want your cards to read good. Read good. So, game engines to the rescue. The way that you can specify how things work, this is true depending on your localization package, is you can start putting in your plural arguments written like this and use this pipe character to separate them. And you go from the smallest to highest order, and the orders are here. So in English, for example, you would have 1 and then many, so you'd say like car, pipe, cars. So banana, pipe, bananas. And then if you translate your thing into English, cool. And for Russian, you could pipe it as banana, bananov. And then it will do the translation correctly, assuming that your localization package works. Is this too much? Is this worth doing? Yeah, it's too much, and it's worth doing because English needs it too. Because that became a problem also for Monster Train. It's like, how do we get our English text to look good? Well, do the same thing that you would for Russian and French and Spanish and any other language, and you just tell the translator, like, hey, this is how this works. So like, when you define your plural variants, this is how this works. Okay, some final thoughts. That was a lot. That was a lot. I had a tantrum at work, and then we got translation in. But I distinctly remember that there was a French review of the game. And the French review said they were shocked to find out that the game was not written in French first. They were like, when I found out an American team made this, they were shocked because they said they had never seen a French translation that good. When the game blew up in Russia, it got really popular in Russia because I cared a lot about getting the Russian translation correct at the time, and this was like 2020, I want to say. A lot of Russian reviews said like, we've never seen somebody get like the font choices correct, get all of this correct, because I had a Russian friend. So I was like, I need you to do me a favor, sir. You need to teach me what's good and what's not. Because we had like handwritten fonts. So I was like, you need to find me like a good Russian handwritten font that I can use. Same with Chinese, same with all of that. That game did really, really well. Turns out, if you care enough and you get the right people in the pipeline early enough, you can make the magic happen. And I feel good about that. I also felt good about the money that I got from that. So, thank you for listening to my rant. I am on Blue Sky if you want to follow me. You could wish list a game I'm working on. You could also hire me, so you can talk to me after this panel. I can help your localization pipeline. Thank you, everybody, and I will take any questions you have. I have like 5 minutes for questions, so if you have a question, come on up to the mic. I'll try to get through it as quickly as I can. Is the mic on?
It is now.
Yeah.
So I see that you're a Genshin player. I'm curious what your take is on, let's say, culturally driven revisiting dialogue. And there's a particular case I'm thinking of where initially there's a story where a character in it has the given name in English anyway of Kazadi. Turns out the character arguably was a reference to a piece of classic Japanese literature, and Kazadi, those 3 kanji, is actually Hana Chiru Sato, and it's actually meant to be read out. So they went back and then they issued a patch to sort of update that. but in the process, they actually lost out on something that comes with the Japanese word kazari, which sort of can have its own meaning in that case.
Right.
Do you find that people appreciate this sort of revisions, or does that tend to kind of disrupt people's first impressions of the game that they can no longer go back to?
In terms of patches updating character names, that's kind of an extreme case. But in terms of translating something so culturally relevant into a language where it doesn't have that association, one good example is Shitenno, which is like the four heavenly kings, but that is actually like a Buddhist term, and so you get a lot of different translations of that, like Elite Four, for example. I've seen the Four Horsemen as a like kind of interesting translation of that, or just like the Final Four. It does not carry the same weight, and that's just because some cultural things simply don't. So it's usually better just like consider that for the locale. There are some that just translated directly as Shitenno. If it's like a really ingrained Japanese type cultural game, then just keep the reference and probably a weeb enough to already know. But in cases like Pokemon, as an example, you just pick a different translation. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
It'd take maybe one or two more questions, but you could meet me outside if we run out of time.
Okay, this is weird. I know I had a friend, we kind of pranked them to play the Japanese version of Modern Warfare 2 because he was Japanese. He goes to the no Russian level, and he's all like, and then in the Japanese dub, they say they're Russian, kill them. What do you think is that instead of remember, no Russian?
What was the original line?
Remember, no Russian.
Call of Duty, right?
Yeah, Modern Warfare 2. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think it's just like the way those languages work is part of why it was translated that way, I would guess. It might be like more common to see those sort of phrasal patterns in one language versus another. Because remember, no Russian or whatever is like very English specific.
Yeah.
You cannot directly translate that as what do we say, EA, Rosyazin? Like that doesn't work.
Right. Yeah, because don't speak Russian. That's
Right. Thank you.
Yes. So thanks for doing this panels. I have questions on the translation with temporarily ban on word by authorities, let's say censorship,
Okay.
something like that. There was a time that I'm from Thailand, right? There was a game Tropico that perfectly translated in Thai, but there's some phrase that the government want to ban at that particular year, so the game got banned outright. So do you have problem? Do you have problem in this kind of aspect of translations or not?
It can come up, so it depends on the content your game is dealing with. So if you have like a lot of LGBT content in your game and you're translating it to Russian, you're probably going to run into a problem because of government regulations. Nintendo had a policy very early on of like, get rid of all the sex and the cigarettes and all of the alcohol references and all of that. We got to get rid of all of that, which you do lose something there. But at the same time, you have to play. You want your game to be released, and
Can some of those be mitigated by translation, let's say from dead to unalive or something like that?
I think ultimately what just will happen is somebody who's a real fan of the game will eventually learn what the original thing was. So this is the case with Pokemon, for example. Earthbound changed a lot of they changed all of their bars to cafes. They got rid of all alcohol references, all of that. So it did, ultimately it's sad when it happens, I think, but there's not much you can do about it, especially when you're handing it off to somebody else to translate. That's it. All right, I can take other questions outside. Gotta get out of the room. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.